What's golden, y'all? It's Brian back with the live stream, Blerding While Dad. I have a little bit. I have a community that I manage and whatnot, and it teaches marketing stuff, and so that's the link you see popping up. I don't know how it got turned on. It automatically pops up whenever I start a stream. But if you guys are interested in learning some of the finer points of marketing, you can absolutely jump in there. It's really tailored towards business owners. Again, I don't know how I got turned on, and I don't know why it keeps popping up on my streams. Um, so last week we kind of had an abbreviated episode because I had to go do dad stuff, and it was really an opportunity to have a conversation about uh, third places, or third spaces, where kids can go and be kids without. And I'm not talking about little kids. I'm talking about like teenagers, where teenagers can go and be teenagers. It's not related to school. It's not cost prohibitive, and is a little bit kind of unstructured, where kids can kind of go hang out without any expectation of the stuff. Where kids can socialize, or teenagers can socialize with other teenagers. And I was talking about how um, it existed when I was a teenager. We had a lot of things that were really tailored towards teenagers, with the expectations that teenagers were going to show up and it was primarily going to be us. And you didn't have an adult hovering around, basically criminalizing our existence there. And I posted that. And one of the interesting things that happens, and this is weird social media kind of thing, where you post something that is your experience, unique to where you are and where you live, and a perspective that's unique to your experience and where you are and where you live. Invariably, you're going to have somebody show up who doesn't have a similar experience. And the interesting thing about the internet is, um, there are people who don't quite understand that your experience is not the universal experience for the whole. Like your experience, your lived experience is not. What's going on? What's up, man? We have this weird thing where it's like people think that their lived experience is like everybody's default lived experience, and it's not. But yeah, like I said, I was talking to my son and basically talking about what I used to have when I was a teenager. We had places to hang out. Like, you can go to the mall and I get harassed by cops. Or you still had mall security on some BS. But if we bought something, they didn't harass you. Now it's almost like they're chasing kids out of the mall. But we had roller rinks and all kinds of other places where we can go. Hell, when I was as an older teenager, when I was like 16 or 17, we even had a nightclub to go to. Like, it was geared towards teenagers. It was a juice bar. We had a DJ. They had a dance floor, their pool tables and everything. It was really meant as a nighttime hangout spot for teenagers. You pay your $5 cover, you get in. And there aren't places like that as much anymore. And all the stuff is kind of moved online. And anytime teenagers get together, even like going to the park, if you have a bunch of teenagers going to the park, somebody's gonna call the cops, which is whack. Like I don't understand how that. I don't understand how instantly, just because there are teenagers outside existing in a place outside the house, we got to call the police to monitor them. But that's kind of the world we exist in right now. And so, like I said, I did that. I posted it on social media, and some people got in their feelings about it and saying it's ridiculous. You think that teenagers should just be out and be unmonitored and blah blah blah. Never said anything along those lines. I said without an adult leering and hovering over them, waiting for them to fuck up something, and waiting for them to get in trouble. And that's what I was saying. Like, it wasn't cool. Like, I don't think that's cool. I think kids need to be able to exist as kids and act as kids do, within bounds, and still have the ability to mess up and do the wrong thing, but learn the lesson from it. Most of us, when we went out, there's always somebody who is acting a fool. There's always somebody who's doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing. And we looked at them, and they were in the minority of all of us, and they ended up getting jammed up or caught up in something, and we just kind of used them as a working example of what not to do. Right. So that was the entire conversation. And like I said, people started feeling some kind of way about it. They said the library. Yeah, well, we have the library too, but you ain't going to hang out at the library every single day, as a kid, and where it's entertaining to that point. You might go and play games one day or a couple times a week, but that, making that your the base spot, that's kind of sad because there's no other place for you to go. So that's really what the conversation was last week, and that's where it ended. And like I said, there's only one section of the show. There's only one section of the show, realistically, and so I have a lot more of heavy shit to get into. I'll get back to the comic books next week, y'all. I'm a little bit behind on what I'm reading anyway. I do have some breakdowns of Immortal Hulk. I do have probably an opinion about Wonder Man. I finished that this week, and I'll probably slide that in here. But we'll get back to the comic books next week. Hopefully, we'll have a new drop from Absolute Batman, because I haven't really covered the Poison Ivy thing, but it's been out like for 2 or 3 weeks, and I feel like that ship has sailed in terms of discussing it. So, all right. So this week, we're at war, right? Like, we're at war, right? Like, or they haven't said they haven't said we're at war. They haven't declared war on anybody, but we are blowing up brown people, which typically means that we are at war in some way, shape, or form. That has kind of been the standard for, is the U.S. at war? Are we dropping heavy bombs on people that are really uninvolved with our issues? And are they brown? Yes, then we're at war. So for whatever reason, and I think that's one of the weird parts about it, they're never really clear about why are we at war. Why are we doing this? Why are we why are we blowing up Iran? There's kind of, and it really feels eerily similar to weapons of mass destruction. Like, I'm getting weapons of mass destruction vibes from it. And I've already lived this life. I've already lived this experience of the mystery bullshit weapons of mass destruction, and we're doing it again. And a section of our country is buying it hook, line, and sinker again. So, but before I get into that, for those that don't know, if you haven't been able to suss it out, I am a current events and political nerd. That is one of my nerd fixations. I do comic books, movies, hip hop, video games, but also politics. My background is I was a journalism major, sociology minor, and I dropped out with like an elective, like two or three classes that were all electives to go. So I did pretty much all the coursework, and then I had to go work and get a real job. And so, but that's always been my fixation: journalism, the intersection of journalism, sociology, some political science sprinkled in there. And so I am a nerd about politics and current events and things like that. And so in this section of How Effed Are We, I'm going to talk about my general 1,000-foot view of the Texas primary. I'm not in Texas. I got family down in Texas. I got friends down in Texas. I'm not in there, but I've been following the race because I feel like it's a microcosm of the larger political climate in the United States, specifically as it pertains to Black voters. And so we're going to talk about the Texas primary and what went down in that Texas primary. All right. And I'm talking about the Texas primary between Jasmine Crockett, James Tallarico, and we're going to talk about electability and what that actually means. Okay. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why Black voters are feeling like they got thrown overboard on this one. And the reason why you're seeing a lot of politically aligned Black folk who are talking about and opining about that specific primary are frustrated with the system as it exists, and it has more to do with a pattern of behavior and less to do with who won or who lost. Okay, so I'm off my script a little bit, but I'll frame it a little bit. When I first started hearing about this race, I started hearing about they were basically going to primary Jasmine Crockett, and a lot of it had to do with how her map got drawn, and there's a gap between her getting in to the race because she didn't quite know where she was going to be, because they were waiting for some stuff to settle with the Supreme Court, and the dudes I remember very clearly, and I can see the dude's face. I can't remember his name. See, is Asian dude and this white dude. And they were on my social media talking about how she was brash and she was unelectable and She couldn't rally the base that they wanted, and they wanted to remove her. They needed different leadership in that seat. And a lot of really strongly, not a lot of really strongly coded um, microaggressions. Basically, she's black and loud, and a black loud woman isn't going to win over isn't going to win over blue Texans. And that's basically what they're saying, because they were trying to get her to win over white Texas voters, white Democrats down in Texas, and male Latinos. And that's who they were hyper focused on. That's who they were obsessed with. And they thought that James Talarico was the answer, Protestant white dude who is, somebody said looked like he's built in a lab to run in Texas as a Texas Democrat. And so they decided that that's who they were going to put their chips behind. Okay. Instantly, that put a lot of black voters on edge. And I'm talking about folks I've talked to down in Texas, down in that area. It put them on edge because they're like, wait a minute. So she was good enough to serve in the Senate, but she's not good enough to retain the seat and run again. She's not electable. And they went through the whole primary thing. There was a whole lot of voter suppression. There was some allegations of voter suppression that went on. A lot of really ugly back and forth going in terms of, why Jasmine lost. There was some stuff that was like lies. Like I asked this dude on Threads, I believe, like, I keep hearing the allegations that Jasmine is getting paid by AIPAC, right? The American Israeli Alliance or whatever, their political action committee. I keep seeing it, but I keep seeing the allegation, but there's no real proof. And they brought up, they showed the thing from AIPAC Tracker, which whatever that source is compromised, because they've kind of shown that it's a right-wing source, that what happens is whenever there's a candidate they don't like, they will manufacture some weird connection to getting AIPAC money, and then publish it. And then as soon as that person's gone, that information disappears and into the wind, but it's already disseminated. It's kind of how propaganda works, right? Propaganda doesn't have to be true. It just has to sound good when it comes out of somebody's mouth. And enough people will believe it. Like you could tell a lie that sounds convincing, and no matter what the actual truth is, you could show people the truth. But if the lie is convincing enough, there's always going to be a segment of the population that will always believe the initial lie that they heard. Because for a lot of people, it's physically difficult for them to say, yeah, I believe that, but that thing seemed to be wrong. And so that's how propagandists understand human psychology, right? And so they can publish something that is absolutely inherently false or completely and totally false. And they know that even if the truth does come out, there's a huge segment of society that will still believe the lie. And that's what happened. They said she took a bunch of AIPAC money and stuff like that. There wasn't necessarily any real proof or any primary sources that said that. It was all secondary and tertiary sources that said it. And the website they used has a specious connection, because it doesn't, you can actually go to the FEC and find who's taking money from who and get an accurate record of what's legally documented. And so that's what happened. And so they use that as the wedge. And then it turned into Democrats versus progressives. And then the back and forth online. What was going to go regardless. And a lot of black voters are feeling used. And I think there's a couple of different reasons why. One, the coalition side of things, where on the campaign stump, and something that white leftists tend to do is they want to seek alliances and try to capture the white working class, Like, one, it's a weird designation because most black people are working class. And so, but they try to make white and working class a redundant term. Anyway, they want to capture the Democrats who used to be Democrats, the white Democrats who used to vote Democrats, and all of a sudden switch their alliances to MAGA. They feel like those people are redeemable and they can extract them from the cult. And so they're going to commit every single resource to extracting them and bringing them into coalition with all these other voters. And one of the things that black voters kind of say is, hey, this dude was a Nazi was acting like a neo-Nazi on Twitter up until a couple of weeks ago. Then uh, president pissed him off, and now he don't mess with the president no more. And so now y'all are like, he was posting a bunch of white supremacist memes up until last week, but he said he ain't on that no more. And so what we want to do is bring him under the tent, and then the black people are going to teach him how not to be racist. Black people are like, hold on a second, wait, what? Yeah, we're gonna bring this dude that used to be racist, but then he says he's not racist no more, and he wants to vote. He wants to go out and be part of our coalition. So we're gonna bring him in, and then y'all can teach him how not to be racist. Black people say, we're not comfortable with that. And then the next thing is, why are y'all being so divisive? Like, come on, why? Why are you being so divisive about it? And that's kind of the pattern that happens, where there is a group of I don't know, liberals, white liberals, white leftists, or whatever, that for whatever reason feel like they can win the hearts and minds of these people that have left that party and join the MAGA movement. They want to win their hearts and minds and bring them back into the coalition. They think that there is a magic candidate that will unlock that group of people and they can bring them back in. And black folks are just supposed to be cool with this person that was racist up until a couple weeks ago, until they decided they weren't part of that anymore. And so that's what happens. And so they'll use our political action, the fact that from a political standpoint, we are one of the most active groups in terms of getting out there and marching and doing activist work and doing a lot of that coalition building. Like, we're the ones that are out there on the front lines doing a lot of that stuff when we have a political interest to advance our candidate that we want to support. And they'll expect that level of labor, but then they want to get to choose who sits in the seat of leadership every single time. And now black voters down in Texas are like, because this guy has come out and said that he wants to reach out and bring in some of these former MAGA voters and bring them into the fold and bring them to the coalition. And these people have said harmful things and really haven't done any kind of the work to prove that they aren't still aligned with those really harmful and ugly ideologies. So I'm way off my script, but I had to get that out there. So that's the fight I've been on Threads, which I've kind of given up on Twitter as any kind of discourse. Twitter, X, whatever. It is completely compromised by bots and neo-Nazi trolls. And so anytime you post anything leaning towards it, invariably you're going to get swarmed under with either somebody rage baiting so for engagement, somebody just saying something racist that's not even connected, or some bot that is this conversation has tripped their wires, and so now they're in the thread arguing like a real person. Twitter is completely compromised. All the people that got banned over the years for being incendiary, volatile, loudmouth, hateful, racists, and bigots, they just let them back. They let them back in, and they haven't really pushed them off the platform. And so they are back contaminating all the discourse and everything. And there's a big rush of them. And so Twitter is useless as any kind of discourse or even kind of rallying stuff, just because, or any kind of organizing or anything, any collective action. Twitter is useless at this point. You shouldn't be doing it on social media anyway, but for a lot of people, they were using Twitter to organize and stuff, and it's kind of compromised. So Democratic primary in Texas triggered a huge retraction online. The race involved Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico. I've already talked about that. Argument exploded because it wasn't about the candidates. It was about what the candidates represented. The electability argument. It appears in Democratic politics pretty consistently. Electability. Who's electable? Sounds neutral, but historically it means something very specific. It means who can win white voters. That's what electability always meant. Specifically since since the 60s and the entire JFK did the back channel to get Dr. King out of jail, and Nixon kind of abandoned him. And that's what kind of swung a lot of black voters, JFK, and really swung a lot of black voters into the Democratic Party. Um, and the Republicans kind of scrambled to figure out what their base was, and so they went and got snatched up a bunch of the former segregationists, brought them into the fold. But this concept of electability has always been, the black vote's always been taken for granted within the Democratic Party. And there are reasons why that black voters in the modern era tend to overwhelmingly vote Democrat. But and the other side is, I don't want y'all to get it twisted. I am not saying go be a MAGA and go be a libertarian or go join the Green Party or anything along those lines. But what I am saying is this: white supremacy doesn't look any better under Democratic rule than it does Republican rule. And as long as we treat black voters like they're the hired help whose job it is to carry your preferred candidate to the seat of power, and never allow us to actually occupy that seat of power for any time, without a level of scrutiny or without having to jump through a bunch of hoops to earn the vote, it's kind of a bullshit proposition, and it's not necessarily fair. It unfairly burdens black voters with doing the work and not receiving any of the benefits. And then we do the work to put the candidate into office, and then they don't advocate narrowly for any of our interests. And so we end up kind of being stuck perpetually in this same space where you have a more polite form of white supremacy, but then you have a meaner form, and those are the two options that we're kind of bouncing between. It's not necessarily fair. So electability has always been who can win white voters, and that conversation tends to appear when black candidates run statewide, or outspoken black politicians gain some level of influence. We start talking electability, right? And we need to clear something up. This idea that black voters going to vote for the black candidate. We've had plenty of black MAGA candidates that have proven that is not true. That's not true. What happens is, and I can even tell you a personal story about it. Black voters are pretty pragmatic when it comes to voting. We are called the most loyal bloc in democratic politics. Okay, but it's more, the loyalty is pragmatism, right? We're going to vote for the candidate that we think kind of represents our interests, tangentially represents, I can never say the word, where they kind of represent our interests, but then also there's a barrier where, like, can this person get, do we think this person has a shot at getting in to office? Okay. Electability again. When Obama ran that first time, I remember the conversation with my mom. And she represented a lot of older black folks who were voters. Obama had a hard time winning over black voters at first, especially ones that were older, that had lived through the civil rights era, because it seemed so unbelievable that there was a serious black candidate for the president of the United States. It was such an unbelievable thing to them. It seemed inconceivable. And up until it looked like, okay, looks like a Democratic candidate. Wow, that's crazy. My mom was with Clinton, Hillary Clinton, because she thought Hillary Clinton could win. And a lot of black folks were Hillary Clinton voters until she wasn't the candidate anymore. Because for them, it was a matter of who has the best chance of winning, the electability. Because black folks always have to say, who are the white folks going to eventually come out for? Like, we have to weigh that into our decision making. It's never about who's going to represent our interests best, who's going to carry forth the interests that we have collectively as a community or even individuals, who's going to carry that message forward best. It's who are white people going to vote for, that we kind of have an alignment with. And so that's what the problem is. And so when it gets played so straight in your face, like what happened with Jasmine Crockett, where they're like, well, she's not electable. the white people won't vote for her. And it's like, well, damn, you're just throwing it all in our face, even though she's already occupied the seat. They just kind of redistrict her out. They try to redistrict her out of a district, but we're not even going to give her a chance. Right. So black voters tend to ask who can actually win, because black communities understand something very clearly. Elections aren't just policy, they're about racial attitudes within the electorate. They represent racial feelings within the electorate. And so we have to take those considerations in of who white people are going to come out and vote for. I remember the entire Jesse Jackson thing. There was a whole back and forth. My mom was struggling to whether she wanted to vote for Jesse Jackson or not. Um, I remember those conversations when I was little. People respected him, they admired him, but um, a lot of voters believed that America would never have a black president. That's why it took so long for the old segment of black moderates to really get on board with the Obama thing. And I think people forget that shit. Like they absolutely forget that. Um, they tend to not remember that side of it. There's this assumption that they're always going to go with the black candidate, and that is not true. Okay. There's a very specific situation that happened with Obama where, like, okay, so maybe we can actually do that. That's what all the hope stuff and all that other stuff, that was a brilliant piece of marketing. If anything else, we're going to hope for something better. And that was, hope and change and all the other stuff he ran on. That was kind of a marketing thing because there was the hope. Will white people actually vote for a black president? And it happened, but a lot of black people, when that train first started pulling out of the station, they weren't on board because they're like, people my mom's age, like, I lived through the civil rights era. This country's never going to do that. And then when it did, for them, there was like this cathartic moment of, wow, it actually happened. And, my mom got caught up and swept up the emotion. I remember, was it Whoopi Goldberg got caught up in the emotion on The View? She's up there crying and stuff like that. A lot of black people that had lived through the civil rights era and seen how hardline segregation was and experienced the segregated lunch counters and everything. When Obama got elected, they're like, oh my God, it actually happened. And they were caught up in a lot of the emotion of it, not understand, and when you go back and tell him, like, well, I mean, he kind of was almost he almost, in order for him to win, he almost had to be leaning like a right leaning Democrat, like a right of center Democrat, in order for him to even have a chance at the seat. And they still were talking about how extreme he was, extreme his dances were and stuff like that. It was crazy work. So, but there was a real sense that comedians just tell jokes about America was never going to have a black president. Okay. So specifically, we jump back to the 80s with Jesse Jackson. A lot of black people respected him at the time. They supported him emotionally, were hoping the best for him, but they didn't vote for him. They voted for the person they thought was going to win. And like I said, Obama adjusted their calculation. Okay. Black voters really did ride with Hillary Clinton because she looked like the safest candidate at the time. And it took Obama going through an entire proving process, basically the entire primary process, before people actually believed, wait a minute, this can actually happen. Okay. And it when he found that he could win over white voters in Iowa, that's where it really kind of took root. But here's the thing, you guys got to understand, there was a level of colorism to it. A biracial, light-skinned black man running for president, yeah, that's a lot easier sell than somebody who have been a darker-skinned black person. That's a harder sell, just because there's unconscious bias in this country about the shade of one's skin color. Okay. And so once Obama proved he could win, win over the white voters, black folks jumped behind him. But it took a long time. I remember it, man. If you weren't in the room and listening to these conversations, you really don't know. And I think that's one of the hindrances of a lot of the Democratic leadership. They're young, they're rich, they're white, they're affluent. They've never been in any real conversation or any real community with any group of black folks where they weren't the majority. Does that make sense? Like, they've never been in the position where they were actually a minority amongst black people. They've never interacted with black people or listening to black people, how black people actually talk when we're around each other. And so their view of how we view the world is not accurate at all. And we saw that with Harris's campaign and how out of touch some of her advisors actually were. And to listen to these motherfuckers now, listening to make the podcasting circuit, they're still out of touch. They still don't get it. Okay. And these are the people that are considered leadership in the party, the young lions, but a lot of them are just rich white kids who grew up in liberal enclaves, and they never really interacted with any black people on any kind of level. They've interacted with black folks that might have been masking or code switching because um, they weren't in their community. They had to leave the black community, go to the white community and perform in that community and then come back to where they were. And so they weren't meeting black people in their natural habitat. They weren't getting real opinions of how black people processed and perceived the political system in this country. And that's what happened with Kamala. Like that hurt her. Like that hurt the Harris campaign. That actually hurt her because the people at the top were so disconnected from what black voters want. And black voters still showed out for her. Like they still showed out for her. Okay. So Harris had a double barrier when she started taking. I'm not going to I'm not going to relitigate all this because it hits a point of argument with white leftists. And we sit there and spar about the politics of race. And I think one of the blind spots that a good size of white leftists and white liberals, I'm not throwing y'all in the same basket, but both of y'all can catch the smoke. Um, there's a real blind spot when it actually comes to how complex black people the layer of complexity that black people have to view the world through in terms of a political thing. For some reason, I've talked to them. There's people that think that all you got to do is find, this class solidarity. And if we just focus on class, all the race stuff goes away. And that's not true. It's absolutely not true. Because if you look at the pictures, even looking at the old photos of, when they used to lynch us, when it was a public event, like when it was like a picnic and everything, and you bring the kids out to watch them kill a black person. That was comprised of white working class folks. Race and class have always been intertwined. You can't separate those two things and have a robust conversation. And I think that's a real blind spot. So I'm not going to go into the what happened with Kamala Harris. I'm going to talk about black voters had a quiet calculation regarding her. A black woman is going to face racial bias and gender bias, and those two biases happen at the same time. There are men in this country that will not vote for a woman. Doesn't matter what or they won't vote for a woman that they're not attracted to. Let's talk it. Let's talk about it. Like, there's so many different nuances to how male voters vote. And so when you have unconscious racial bias and a conscious bias, two things run into each other, and it makes it very hard for a black woman to get elected without the support. But instead of forcing white voters to say, no, if you want this candidate, if you want your political will advance, then you need to come out and show and do what black and brown people have been doing for years, which is going out and voting pragmatically for the candidate that we think has the best chance of winning, regardless of whether we're in love with them or not. Some of them won't do that. They have to put in the white candidate. And in the Texas race, it's really interesting because black voters are basically saying the same thing, the same response that white voters were doing for Harris and also for Jasmine Crockett. If she wants my vote, she needs to come earn it. they're saying the same thing about their candidate. If he wants my vote, he has to come earn it. And people are fucking mad about it. Like they're irate about it. um, and I got a couple of different theories about it, but I think one of the real panics is they see in their mind, there's this window of opportunity to turn Texas blue, right? And I don't think that, and I could be wrong. I hope, and on some level, I hope I get proven wrong by this. I don't buy that James Talarico is going to win the Senate seat. I just don't. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to matter what coalition of voters really get behind him. I don't see it happening. But if he does, cool. Cool. But it goes to a larger piece because on one hand, all these voices are telling black voters, you're not needed. We got the coalition of white voters and Latino voters, and they like him. And so we don't need you. And black voters in Texas are like, all right, cool. And go knock yourself out. And as soon as they say that, and invariably somebody's like, well, what do you mean? You're not going to vote? Never said that. I just said, cool, go win those other voters. Or earn my vote. But you're not going to earn my vote and earn the vote of reformed racist dude over here who was MAGA up until a couple weeks ago. You're not going to earn my vote and earn his vote and then expect you're going to keep my vote. But it's this weird thing where black voters in Texas are like, all right, go. I mean, if he wants my vote, he's got to earn it. But if you guys think that you don't need black voters, like you guys are saying, we don't need y'all. We didn't need y'all. You only make up 14% of the population. Ha ha ha. Okay, then go win the MAGA voters over, bro. That's what they're saying. And people are mad. Like they James Talarico's folks are mad as people is mad about that. Because black voters are like, listen, you're not going to wield this over me where you're talking about, well, this is how bad it's going to be in this how bad. You're basically trying to threaten black people with the same country that we've been living in. If you don't get him out of office, then what? The Republicans in Texas are going to like still do the things that they've been doing for the last 50 years. I mean, what are you threatening here? I think the thing that terrifies them is, especially with all the stuff that happened in Minnesota, a lot of, because viewer stream, I saw a lot of people really get engaged when ICE killed them folks up in Minnesota. Now, ICE done killed a bunch of black people. ICE done killed a bunch of brown people. They've beaten and harassed Native Americans. They've been doing all kinds of the most all over the country. Like I said, they killed a brother, and nobody really raised any flags about it or anything. But we see what happens in Minnesota, where ICE overzealously killed 2 American citizens, and it was enough to turn the country upside down. And for a lot of white moderates who are on the fence, they saw that essentially it can happen to them. And this administration will treat them the same way that they treat us, where there's this presumption of guilt. And all they have to do is come out and create a narrative about why this black person deserved to get killed by the police. And it didn't work the way that they wanted to, but they saw exactly where people that aren't in that MAGA movement, where the administration views them. They view them as disposable bodies. And they didn't like it. They glanced down at the bottom of the blender and they had a chance to see us waving up at the bottom of the blender like, hey, we down here. And they trying to push you down in it, and they didn't like it and they fought against it. I think there's an element of that, and they think that they can use that fear of being pushed to the bottom of the blender as something to scare us. It's like, we've been down here. We've been living under this. We've been living under this kind of white nationalist kind of regime for a couple of years now. We're used to it. And if we really want to get brass tacks, We've been living under this weird state of not full citizenship, secondhand citizen status for a long, long, long time. And we've survived the Bush years, we survived the Reagan years, we survived the Nixon years. Like we're going back, FDR. Like we survived all of these different administrations on some level, but y'all haven't. Y'all was always taken into consideration, and so to threaten Black people with more of the world that that their parents lived in and that they've lived in, then it's going to be what it's going to be roughly the same. I'm not one of those believers where I'm so nihilistic where I don't think politics matter at all or votes matter at all. I am a little bit more jaded about it. I'm not that hard line where I'm like, none of this matters, and I'm not nihilistic to that point. But you're talking about um, a life that is roughly the same for a lot of Black people. Aside from, active voter suppression. We've been under active voter suppression for decades. Um, um, Disproportionate police and law enforcement. We've been under that for decades. Um, Social inequity and inequality. We've been at that. We've been locked in that for decades. And to threaten people and saying, well, if you don't come out and vote for this candidate, this magic, like they call, like, and I'm using their words. White dude said that Jamestown Regal was built in a lab to attract white Democrats. You're telling us to put our faith in that and that he's going to save us all. That's a hard sell. And you're not going to threaten Black people with the world that they've already grown up in and existed in. We already lived through Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Sonia Massey, all these people that we done seen murdered unjustly. We've experienced all of that. I've had friends and I've had people I know actually be killed by police and experience cover-ups and stuff like that. And to use that as a weapon or some kind of thing to threaten Black people with is like, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So the reaction after the Texas race, primarily at the primary results, Black people online start expressing frustration, some anger, some grief, some disillusionment. And the response from many white moderates was immediate. Calm down. Don't sit out. If Democrats lose, it's your fault. Like within 24 hours. Get over it, guys. Get out there and start stumping for our candidate that we told you was electable because your Black candidate was not electable. There was it was panic. And the reaction revealed something deeper. Black folks are the most reliable turnout group in Democratic politics. So when frustration appears, other parts of the coalition start to panic. Wait, we can't depend on them the way that we were dependent on them. Oh shit, what are we gonna do? Out as lectures instead of actually listening to what we're actually saying, what the grievances are. I got called a bot 1,000 times on Threads, bro. Like, and they're like, well, this is a brand new account. Like, yeah, because I just opened up the account for Blerding While Dad on this platform. What are you talking about? Well, you must be a MAGA bot. I am not a MAGA bot. And I posted videos on here. You should know, like, all you gotta do is go to any social media I'm on and see that I am not anywhere aligned with that. But it was this weird panic. And it goes to a larger point of how we perceive Black people's emotions in this thing. And so now I got a story. And this happened a couple of times at the organization I was at. One of the very first times was I came into work. This was probably the same year that this happened. I came into work. My cousin had been killed by the police. And this goes in the John Henryism thing too, where I never really take a day off when I'm grieving. Like I don't remember the only time I've ever taken any time off from work when I was grieving was when my mom died. But I would tend to work through it, which is not a great thing. Anyway, my cousin, a friend, and we didn't find out we were related until later on in our friendship. We met each other when we were like 3 years old. And 3 to 4 years old. And I get the news that he had been killed by the police. And I kind of called and kind of told him, hey, what was going on? I said, I'm going to come in anyway, but and just so that you guys know I'm not all here. And they're like, oh, yeah, come on in. I go into work and I'll never forget it. I'm working with, and this dude was a bushfolder. Like, um, first thing he says to me is like, yeah, I saw what happened to your cousin. I'm really glad that his dad didn't try to blame the cops, though. Not, "Hey, Brian, how are you doing? You lost somebody that you've known for pretty much all of your life. I'm glad the cops didn't, they you know." And then a couple weeks later, I got written up because I wasn't smiling enough at work. This is not the first time that's happened at that organization, and that was the first time, but it wasn't the last. I got written up for not smiling enough at work. I was grieving the loss of a friend that I had since I was a little kid, but they wrote me up for not smiling enough at work because my sadness for them was this weird perceived threat that I wasn't this happy-go-lucky, bouncing all over the house, friendly guy that I had been. I was down, and dealing with grief, but I wasn't allowed to access that grief. I had to sit there and smile through it. They wrote me up for not smiling like I just lost somebody that I've known from all of my life. I had the same thing happen when I found one of my aunts, you know, um, had to go in and get amputation for um, diabetes and whatnot. And I kind of called them and I didn't have all the details. I was just kind of filling them in on what happened. And when I said it, invariably, um, the other person I work with, the other manager, I basically had 2 managers there. Instead of saying, "Hey, Brian, what do you need?" It was, "What hospital are they in?" And it was this really weird accusatory thing. Like, I haven't even talked to my mom to get the details. I'm still getting the details of where she's at, what hospital is she in. Like, super accusatory, not necessarily supportive, um, at all. And then I get another, when she went through that and then we lost her, I go through that again. "You're not smiling. Why aren't you smiling? I mean, like, you need to be smiling more." Like, I'm not allowed to access being down or grieving or having it wasn't affecting my work, anything else. They told me it wasn't affecting my work. It wasn't affecting my relationships in the house. I just wasn't smiling enough for them, and I got written up for it. The next time that it happened to me, I had a promotion. I was working in a completely different capacity there. And I was more of in a supervisory position. And so I had a director that was above me. Okay. At the time, I was my mom was sick, in and out of the hospital. Um, and there was a project that I had been working on, a technological project that I've been working on with IT, and I put in all the blood, sweat, and tears and all the groundwork and all the testing and all the other stuff and all the coordination on my end, in addition to the job I was doing because it was going to help our caseworkers out in the field. And I watched them take my work and literally attribute it to somebody else and give them the credit for it and shove me to the background. And I'm this my mom being sick in and out of the hospital and stuff like that. And I got written up for one, when I take my mom to the ER. Um, and I was sitting up there with them. They're like, "Well, we couldn't reach you." And I said, I contacted you and told you about it. And it's your job as a supervisor. When I call you, that's how the chain of command works here. I call you if I have something where I'm not available, you become available to my staff. You just didn't want to come off your weekend." In the mom. So I got written for being in the hospital with my mom, and then written up for not smiling enough when I got back. Um, when it was such a weird thing, and it keeps coming back to this. Whenever a Black person has, in a lot of professional settings and mixed company, whenever we have emotions that aren't happy or laughing or joking, things are more complex than that. Um, there's this weird tendency to want to manage our emotions for us and prompt us to smile or prompt us to perform happy work. And I saw that jump out after the Jasmine Crockett, James Tallarico thing, where they're telling black folks down in Texas, you need to get over it. Why are you mad? You're not allowed to be upset about this. You need to get over it. Or it's okay to be upset, but you need to suck it up and get it and start giving directions about what we're supposed to do. Here's the thing, y'all. There's a strong history of not only black people being prevented from voting. That's the one thing that happened. But there's also a history of black people being forced to vote for candidates that went against their interests, and they were facing a threat of eviction, threat of physical violence and stuff. And they basically went into black districts and said, you guys are going to vote for this, specifically like sharecroppers and stuff. You guys are going to vote this way for this candidate that I want you to vote for. Otherwise, we're going to evict you. We're going to kick you out. We're going to fire you. And so there's a long history of that. And for people down in Texas to sit there and basically be barking at black people saying, you better get out there and support our candidate, or that is not the way to approach it, y'all. I got a lot more thoughts about this. I'm going to move on. Okay. Still kind of in the how fucked are we thing. Like I said, we're at war. We're in, like I said, and way I know we're at war is, like I said, we're dropping bombs on black people that don't have anything to do with what we're bombing brown people that have nothing to do with the people that we're mad at. Okay. And so one of the things I see whenever the U.S. undertakes one of these unilateral military actions that are not really supported by the citizenry, it's always determined by some rich person sitting in an ivory tower somewhere. Typically, is that person is a CEO of an oil company or something, because they're the ones that kind of get determine what wars we get into and what wars we don't nowadays. You go to social media, and this is kind of a modern thing because we didn't have this level of connectivity like when we invaded Iraq for no reason. Twitter was still I don't even think Twitter was in existence. I think it came out almost after it had been in Iraq for a while. Anyway, I've seen this strange argument online where people claim that black Americans are complicit in American imperialism. And it's an interesting argument because America is one of the longest running colonial projects in the world. And imperialism and colonialism are cousins. I don't think people are aware, and I'm not necessarily expecting people that are in the global South who are actually actively being exploited by this country to look into Black American history. I really don't expect that of them. They're having to deal with their survival thing. But at the same token, when we're saying everything they're doing to you, they've done to us, I am very serious about that. Black folks have been bombed by their own government. We've been poisoned by our own government. We've been targeted with agitation propaganda, targeted with all kinds of different propaganda stuff, all kinds of cyber warfare, any kind of warfare that any kind of weapons that you see deployed internationally, they are normally tested somewhere on black people. There's a place I believe in St. Louis, where they actually tested chemical weapons in a controlled in an area that mimicked what they would see in Russia, and they picked a black neighborhood to do it. And they said, we're just testing dispersal patterns. The chemicals that we sprayed you with were benign and have anything. They weren't serious. And people were like, well, we were coughing and sneezing. Don't worry about it. But then you see the cancer rates are through the roof there for that generation of kids that grew up in St. Louis, where they basically sprayed them with chemicals. And they were using that as a testing ground to test chemical weapons in case they had to go use chemical weapons in areas in Russia during the Cold War. So they claim black Americans are complicit in American imperialism, and the reasoning is kind of shallow. A lot of it is because they see black soldiers, black celebrities, black politicians. They're highly visible black people, and they assume that that highly visible black person is endemic or representative of all of us, right? They see that, and that's typically how that's the problematic nature of media, right? We export media that has nothing but negative stereotypes about black people worldwide, and then the world kind of forms their opinion of black Americans through that media. And I've seen black people in the diaspora do the same thing, where they see some black person who is a black American who's high profile or celebrity um, acting a certain way, and they think that they represent some kind of mainstream of black political thought. And it's like, nah, man, we don't fuck with that person, bro. We don't even take them seriously. Why do you take them seriously? So I see black soldiers. Most recently, they got some. They've made these black girls dancing as the who are soldiers. They made them kind of the face of American the military, and it's like that's not accurate. But then there's also some other reasons why black people conscript and join the army. And it's not all of us have the same reasoning, right? But I could tell you, growing up, um, my generation, they targeted the shit out of us in terms of recruiting us to the military, bro. Like they targeted us relentlessly. And it was framed as, hey man, if you don't join the military, man, you probably gonna end up in jail, bro. I even got swept up in it. I was college bound. And it was kind of known that I was college bound. And they was still kind of like, oh, that college thing might not work out, bro, you know. And you know how it works, man. You drop out of college, and then next thing you know, you're getting in and you're getting into legal trouble and stuff, and the military can keep you out of jail. It was sold to entire generations of black and brown folks and white folks. Like poor white folks got swept up in it too. But it was sold to us as join the military. You're going to get a career ladder, and it's a way to keep you out of jail. And I've seen people say, "Oh, you're just doing it for economic incentive and blah blah blah." No, no, no. We're talking about either the way it was phrased was either you join the military, or you're going to go end up in jail. This is crack era, you know, coming out of the crack era. That's how it was explained to us. And so a lot of dudes my age and a lot of women my age, they joined because they're like, I don't have any other options. I have no other opportunities. Not going to college. Um, don't have a degree or anything. This is a way for me to get my college paid for. Or I don't have the money to go to college. This is how I'm going to get my college paid for. Or it's going to keep me out of trouble and keep me from going to jail because a lot of my other family members got jammed up in the system, and I don't want to get a criminal record, so I'm gonna end up being in the military. And you can talk to a lot of brothers in the military, a lot of sisters in the military that are my age. That's how they got roped in. Economic promises. Okay. There's power dynamics. Representation is not control. Black communities are not directing American foreign policy. We have never been a consideration in American foreign policy. Hold on, we have actually. Now let me think about that. Because when the option was between Democrat, Republican, or communist, they 100% leaned into, hey, black people, what do you want so that you don't join the communists, so you don't become communists. Like that was a real fear in the 50s and 60s. But we aren't directing foreign policy. We don't have anything to do with what Trump does. Like we have no, like, there's a white nationalist government running the country right now. They ain't listening to what we're telling them about who we can invade and who not. Okay. We are not directing American foreign policy. We never directed American foreign policy. Okay. We're living inside the system just like everyone else. You know, a lot of countries in the global south, they may be living under a regime. Some of them may be living under a regime. Just because you live in that regime, does that mean that you are complicit in their policies? Or are you just trying to survive day to day? Because that's what a lot of black folks in this country are doing. Okay. So let's talk about imperialism versus colonialism. Okay. Imperialism, this is when a country projects its power abroad. It's really interesting to see people from the UK opine about what the US is doing. Um, when you can probably find people in Kenya that survived concentration camps, British run concentration camps. Like they're on our neck about imperialism. Like, let's talk about some of the other, India, Kenya, some of these other countries that you involved yourself in. Um, you were pretty crucial to forming Israel. Like there's a lot of other aspects to that. But imperialism is projecting power abroad, military intervention, economic domination. Okay, that's kind of the lane of imperialism. Colonialism is control over populations inside the territory itself. Okay, extraction, surveillance, restriction. That is what a lot of black folks in America are living under. It's a colonial project, bro. And so you're asking hostages of American colonialism to disrupt their imperialism. And just because you see a couple of us on the ground in their imperialist projects doesn't mean that there's this groundswell of us being able to do anything against them. Well, why don't you guys get out there and overthrow them? Overthrow who, what, when, what? There's a whole recent history of black activists being disappeared, bro. Like, look at what happened. The Ferguson activists who keep getting dead, where, they found bro shot in the head in his car and set on fire, and they're talking about it was a suicide. What? So the idea that we have this enormous political capital to force this country to do anything is kind of wild. Okay. Black communities have historically experienced the colonial side of American power. We're captives of the colonial side of it. And so we don't have a lot of power to influence the imperialist side of things. Okay. So examples of internalized colonial control include slavery, of course, slavery, sharecropping, the Jim Crow, redlining, COINTELPRO, and people don't understand what that is. COINTELPRO basically was our intelligence agencies were actively trying to disrupt what they thought were what they perceived as political threats to their power in this country from the black community. And so COINTELPRO used all the different psychological warfare things, and they beta tested a lot of psychological warfare things that you're seeing played out in other countries right now. They beta tested them on black folks. The most famous example that people always point to is what happened with the Panthers, where COINTELPRO was kind of a double-edged sword because it was designed to sow disinformation, but also distrust. So a lot of the Panthers didn't know whether they were being worked, and that was the thing that worked. That was a mechanism that worked the best because they didn't know who to trust. They were jumping at shadows, and they took advantage of some of the vices of the Panthers and things along those lines and exploited them. But COINTELPRO, Brother Malcolm, on MLK, all of these people, all of the Jesse Jackson, what the entire thing about Al Sharpton possibly being an informant, all this other stuff comes from different aspects of American intelligence working inside the country to subvert any acquisition of black or consolidation of black political power. Okay, mass incarceration is another one. The prison, the preschool to prison pipeline is a real thing. These systems are internal forms of control. They're not signs of shared power. Okay. Black people are surviving these things on a daily basis. Military is framed as an opportunity ladder. Okay. A lot of critics misunderstood black folks military participation. Especially during Vietnam specifically, there was a lot of black people that got drafted in there. And they made an exception to try to draft as many black males as possible. So we're kind of overrepresented in that aspect of it. And it was kind of seen as a way to thin the herd. Like I said, I have family that went over there and experienced some horrific things. They still live with the nightmares of being deployed over there. Okay. And you talk to them about the racism they encountered in the military, especially during the Vietnam era. It was absolutely crazy. Okay. But military has been always framed as opportunity ladder. All right. And they misunderstand how black people participate in it. In communities, in a lot of black and brown communities, Native American communities, any impoverished community, Military is framed as a pathway to education, a path to stability, a path out of poverty, a path out of incarceration. Okay. And they targeted a lot of working class kids. Now, the pivot is you're starting to see more and more middle class kids represented in the military. But for a long time, they targeted us. And so while most of the people you may see in doing military service are middle class, um, you're going to see an outsized chunk of working class and people from marginalized communities in the military because that's how it's been framed. But stability out of poverty, but they'll hit working class communities, rural communities, minority communities because the military sells the opportunity. The entire joke about, hey, you can come and get a Hellcat. Like that's kind of how it's been framed. Okay. And that doesn't equal ideological support for imperial wars. That's I'm trying to stay out of jail. I'm trying to have a life. I'm trying to earn a living. But then also it's there's a level of because when they was coming, when they were, like I said, they were even trying to get me when I was in high school, even though I was college bound. And the way they approached me was first it was, well, the college thing might not work out and you can get in trouble and you might go to jail. You can do the military, get some maturity, and then you can go to college and really crush it. That's the first thing. And when they found out, I was like, yeah, but I got an academic scholarship. Well, I mean, if you come in, you're a candidate. And they looked at my ASVAB scores, like you're a candidate for officer stuff. I'm like, I don't think so. Then they found out I was asthmatic and my feet were flat as boards, and they're like, "Yeah, we're not going to mess with you anymore." But that's how it was framed to me. That's how they kind of stepped to me. And like I said, this is the '90s. It's really kind of insidious because I've seen a lot of cats get caught up in that, where it's framed as, "Yeah, man, all you got to do is just join up, man. You just kick it." We haven't had any major wars because at the time in the '90s we were in, we were about, we had Iraq and stuff like that. But we had finished up the first invasion of Iraq, which is stupid. We had multiple invasions of Iraq, but a lot. We weren't thinking that we were going to get thrust into any war, and then September 11th happened, and then we're in perpetual war. And so a lot of Black folks my age, who are military age, who thought that they were just getting in so they can get their college paid for and then they can get out and get a stipend or get a pension or whatever. Now they trapped in there. That's what happened. So the military sells opportunity and it doesn't equal ideological support for these imperialist endeavors. The reality of growing up post-crack era, my generation saw the crack epidemic. I saw mass incarceration, the collapsing job markets, collapsing opportunities caving in on themselves, hyper policing, like you couldn't walk outside your house without seeing a cop driving around somewhere. Cops that were bored, and they would just, it was just expected that if you was outside at a certain time, you was going to get assaulted, thrown up against the wall, searched, and sometimes even worse. Not going to get into that. And so the environment that the military looked like structure, it looked like discipline, it looked like paycheck, it looked like safety, which sounds crazy to say, but it looked like a way out of all of the other deleterious things that were happening post-crack era. And like I said, I'm not expecting somebody who's in the global South who is suffering under American imperialism right now to understand that or know that without me saying it to them. But the way it was framed to a lot of Black kids, and that's why you see Black soldiers, is framed as this way out. Now, some of us, it was always kind of the thing. You were in a military family. That's what everybody did. Your dad was in the military, uncle's in the military, and you're just kind of following tradition. But for some of us, it was, what else are we going to do? Because, like I said, for guys at my age, man, there weren't no job. The job market wasn't there. Everybody's trying to go down to Atlanta or start a rap career. The pickings were slim. Okay. And so a lot of times the American marketing machine, it exports this, land of milk and honey kind of thing. Exports this global image of prosperity, the American dream. But poverty in America can be brutal, bro. It used to work in how I worked in houses where people didn't have electricity or running water and stuff. Um, you know, and just because poor people have more resources here than they have in other places doesn't mean that it's not equally as brutal. Okay. And so the poverty here can be really extreme and brutal. And just because it's contextualized in a wealthy country doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Right. And so a lot of times poverty in America, it means unstable housing, violence, a lot of police contact, entire drug economies that you have to navigate your daily life around, lack of healthcare. You don't go to the doctor until you have to go to the ER. Okay. These are survival environments and they're not just simply bad decisions. So if you're a kid who grows up in that and you're not necessarily college bound, or you don't have the money to go to college, your parents don't have the money to send you to college, and scholarships aren't plentiful, um, what options are you going to take? So seeing Black American faces in American institutions doesn't mean Black communities are controlling these institutions. Being represented in these places is not power. It's just us existing there. Okay. I'm kind of circling back here because this is the next segment. I've kind of touched on this. I gave the entire thing about the emotional policing of Black people, um, and acceptable emotions versus unacceptable emotions. And um, there's a cultural reaction to Black emotions. Like, our emotions are dangerous. If we're not happy, if we're not joyful, if we're not joking or laughing or smiling, people assume that there's danger there. You know, it's danger. Um, and so in public, we can be happy, we can have humor, we can be entertaining. But anger, frustration, grief is a big one. Self seriousness, uh, experiencing depression in public um, can be detrimental, especially if you're a Black person working in a corporate environment. Okay. Um, they got to, some people feel like you have to manage that emotion of a Black person because it's dangerous. It's really weird. I've had it. It's hard to explain unless you've had it happen to you, where you get punished for grieving, and people know that you're grieving. People know that you're having a hard time interpersonally, and you still get punished because you're not smiling enough. Like I said, I've been written up literally because I was not smiling enough. It was made no, it's not affecting my job or anything, but I just need to smile a little bit more, act like I'm happy to be there, even when I wasn't 100%. Okay. Um, it wasn't performance, it wasn't hostility, it was I was not smiling enough. Okay. These moments came right after my cousin was murdered. I wasn't cheerful, I wasn't joking, I was grieving. And I got written up because I wasn't smiling enough. Nothing else. It wasn't you're being mean to the clients, you're making us, you're unpleasant to be around, none of that stuff. It was just I was just not happy enough for them. And they felt like that was a threat to them. Okay. Um, again, when my aunt was in the hospital, called to work to explain situation. Instead of concern, they wanted verification. What hospital, what room number is she in? They asked me that. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just getting this information from my mom. And she didn't tell me the room number on the voicemail. I don't know. I'm having a hard time believing that. The suspension, not, are you okay or anything? It was, hmm, uh, uh, you Negroes don't have problems like that. um, and so it's my emotional reality was making people uncomfortable because I wasn't smiling enough. I don't think you understand what that does to a person, especially in a work environment, at a place, at a job you actually like, where you're actually getting penalized because you're not performing happiness to their satisfaction. Okay. But then it goes into the political tone policing. Again, it goes back to what I was saying with black voters expressing frustration with the system. Don't say that. Calm down. You're hurting the cause. You're being divisive. Your needs, you articulating your needs and your frustration in ways that you feel exploited by this process that we all adhere to. It's giving me the sads. It's not making me, I'm not feeling the warm fuzzies behind that. And so you need to stop. Take that for how you will. All right, I'm gonna do one more thing, and then I'm gonna get up out of here. Okay, and this is words mean things. So I want to talk about the concept of contrarianism, and it's really a frustrating thing to deal with, um, especially on social media. Okay, there's a difference between being a skeptic and being a contrarian. Okay, there's a difference. Healthy skepticism and performative contrarianism. These are two different things. Healthy skepticism evaluates evidence. Contrarianism imposes consensus just reflexively. It just says, if most people believe it, then I don't believe it, regardless of what the facts are. Okay. So here's the analogy I've written up. So follow me. I got to read this because I wrote this 2 weeks ago. So imagine a lion is running through the mall and everyone's running towards the exit because they're like, there's a lion loose in the mall. We got to get out of here. The contrarian says, everybody's running this way. I'm going to run that way. I'm going to go towards the lion. That's how a contrarian thinks. That's not intelligence, y'all. That's just being dumb, being stupid, and pretending like you're thinking independently. And there's a lot of people that are doing that right now, where they shun the consensus thought because they feel like, well, if I believe the opposite of what everybody else believes, then that makes me smarter than them. I'm gonna go run into the jaws of the lion because everybody's running that way. I'm gonna run this way towards the lion. That's kind of how I view it. Okay. Um, and so social media rewards it. They reward conflict. They reward people arguing with contrarians. Yeah. A lot of people will grift with that aspect. There's so many grifters that play upon people's need to feel different and original. They just prey upon it. And they will enlist them in any number of schemes and things that don't make any sense. Yeah. Now, this is one. Yeah, we can get down on this one. That's the one right there. That's the poster child for contrarianism right there. Because he believes different. We're going to take billions of dollars of science that's already been established and just throw it out there because RFK don't align with. He doesn't think that that's the thing. He doesn't think that that exists. He doesn't think that's real. And so he's going to substitute his belief for the reality we exist in. And he's built an empire off of it. And Dr. Oz is kind of complicit in because Dr. Oz has his little supplement company and he's shilling those supplements as answers to a lot of these things that RFK says are made up or are hoaxes or whatever. It's a ripoff. And they take advantage of people who think they take advantage of people who like, oh, I got to think different. Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil should be arrested for calling himself a doctor. Like, I think his license, his behavioral science license was revoked. Like they stripped that because of some conflicts of interest stuff that he got into. I got to look it up, but if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Phil should be in jail for calling himself a doctor. So I was a scam artist in Kansas. I can believe that. I'm in Nebraska, and Kansas is definitely a place where you would thrive as a scam artist. You could 100% really make a really lucrative career scamming people in Kansas. Yeah, he got sued, right? Wasn't it a lawsuit or something, or didn't he steal a bunch of money from people? And I mean, I clocked Dr. Phil like when I was doing working residential youth homes. Um, and I was working my way up the ladder to being a director of one spa scam. Okay. I was working my way up the thing and um in amazement that people would take their children on Dr. Phil. So Dr. Phil could have them kidnapped and shipped out to one of these camps for troubled kids. And the audience ate it up because we are programmed as a society to want to see people yell at misbehaving children. No, some of them were actually real because I've received kids from some of these places. I think one of them I actually had to call CPS in Texas on one of those places because one of my kids got sexually abused there. And this was a place this was a place that I had heard about on Dr. Phil. So he was sending kids off to these places. They didn't have any, there was no safeguards. There was no uh, behavioral specialists working there. There was nobody shaping the program so that it was kind of a rehabilitative or therapeutic model or anything. It was just, I like yelling at bad kids, and I'm going to build a facility where I get to kidnap children and scream at them and beat them and abuse them and make them go on forced marches and put them in stress positions and have other kids tackle them when they misbehave and all kinds of other stuff. So Dr. Phil should be in jail. Yeah. And when I say bad, I'm saying bad because these are just kids that the parents, they don't listen, they're like, well, this kid doesn't listen to me. Teenagers don't listen to parents. That's just that's part of the game. As a parent, your job is to convey the message that the kid is going to listen to and give them room to go out there and mess things up sometimes. I mean, that's just the game. And these kids were ungovernable and stuff like that. And so Dr. Phil would have these boot camp instructors come scream at them and kidnap them and whisk them away. You know, yeah, kids with shit parents or parents that because there's a generation of parents. Um, there's this generation of parents that they grew up in that they were Gen Xers, so they grew up in like greatest generation baby boomer kind of parenting, where some of it is super authoritarian and then it's also super authoritarian, but then also super latchkey. So it was kind of that weird back forth. And so they're used to being able to just yell. Their expectation is I can just yell at you and tell you and make demands of you. And I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to establish any trust. I don't have to show that I'm a reliable authority figure. I just got to scream at you. And when the kid doesn't jump, then instantly they're calling Dr. Phil, this kid's out of control. You know, this kid's out of control. I've seen so many little dudes on there, and I think I know some of it was fake, but it's like little Johnny over here. He's been down. He's been hanging out with the local street gang. Um, he's been out in the local street gang scene since he was 10 years old. How? How's this little suburban kid? He lives in some suburb in Connecticut somewhere, but he's getting down to the hood in Connecticut and hanging and running with the. How's he getting down there? How is this happening? You know, um, you know, little rich girl. She says she's down to die for her set. She saw that on TV and now she's playing a character. But then the parents say we got to get this scary black drill instructor to come in and scream at her, and then they're gonna kidnap her out of her bed and take her to this unregulated boot camp with people that haven't passed a background check, and we're gonna leave her to their mercy. I don't okay, and see, here's the thing: I don't give the instructional rules. You're right, and back it up. All you got to that's the real thing, and understand that a child, like a teenage, part of their brain development is defying you at some point in time. That's learning boundaries, learning what you can get away with and what you can't, and standing 10 toes down and enforcing those boundaries, but letting them know that you're enforcing the boundaries, but they're still going to be safe, even if they're in trouble. They're still going to be safe. That's important, and some of these parents don't have the tools. One of the biggest, one of definitely on the parents and one of the biggest. So I had a case, and this was the single most dysfunctional family I've ever worked with, hands down. It's not even close. The most dysfunctional family I'd ever worked with. To this day, they still stay on top of mine. Um, Parents were both executives. I'm not going to go into where they were, but they were both executives at the same company. I walked into their house. Their living room could possibly fit most of my house in it. It was one of the biggest houses I've ever been in my life. And I know I have rich people in my family. It's the biggest house I've ever been in my life. It was the most dysfunctional family I'd ever encountered in my life. And these parents, they would have been the perfect people that would have called Dr. Phil and had somebody come and kidnap their kid, because they thought that's what I was there to do as a case manager. They thought I was going to come and be big, black, and intimidating and scare their kid into compliance. And the only thing I did was I came in there, and the kids started popping off. I said, "Hey, man, I don't know you. I haven't disrespected you in any way, shape, or form. You will not talk to me like that, because I'm not talking to you like that." Instantly, I was one of the kids' favorite people, because I stood up to him. I didn't take his shit. I didn't let him know, and I let him know, you're still safe with me. I'm not going to bark at you. I'm not going to scream at you, but we are not going to do this. And yeah, I gave him a boundary, and he was looking for a boundary. And all his parents wanted to do was just throw money at his problems. They wanted to throw money at they wanted to throw money at the problem and have somebody else be the enforcer and be the hammer on him. And he ended up being like, I was one of his favorite people, just because he knew that I wasn't going to put up with his crap. And he knew if I was showing up, he had done something wrong. And he's like, "I'm sorry, Mr. Bryan, blah, 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 blah." His parents never got that. They're sitting there looking at me like I'm doing magic or something, because I get this kid to listen to me. I'm like, I respect him. I give him boundaries, and I tell him what I expect out of him. You guys, every single time you throw money at him, you throw money at the problem and want somebody else to fix it, because you have a lot of money, and you don't want to look internally and say, well, maybe it's the fact that, maybe it's the fact that mom indulges a little bit too much and isn't there to monitor him. And dad indulges a little bit too much in something else, and we're not really present to monitor him. And when we do finally address a behavior, it's a shouting match, as opposed to, "Hey, I don't like that. Why don't we fix that?" It's never calm. So, but yeah, if I wouldn't been there, if it wasn't for that level of intervention, because he was court placed, but he wasn't a state ward at the time yet. They would have gone that route. They would have shipped him off to a boot camp, because dad was threatening it the entire time. And you know, his parents were just they were fake tough parents. Fake tough. Wanted to, since they were still putting on airs for the people around in their corporation, and they had to show that they had it all together, they had to do this fake tough thing. And the threat was, "We'll send you off. We could send your ass off to a boot camp." And I'm sitting there telling them, like, "You're threatening. You want me to come take him to jail? I can tell you, the youth center ain't like that." The local youth center is not bad. It wasn't as bad as it. The biggest mistake, and I told him, it's like, the biggest mistake that you guys can make is sitting there and telling them how terrible and scary the local youth center is. That's the biggest mistake. Biggest mistake. You tell them how awful and scary the local youth center is, and then he goes to the youth center and realizes it ain't too bad, because it's not. It wasn't at the time. And now you're liars in his mind, and he's going to keep playing that game until he ends up getting into a real jail, and then it is every bit as bad as you guys told him, and by then it's too late. Or we could put some interventions in place to keep him out of those places, and don't use those places to try to scare him, and give him some other options. And my goal was to give him other options. So we ended up getting him graduated. I don't know. By that time I was kind of moving on to my next position. I try to keep up with him, but I can't find him. And his parents are rich enough they can keep off the grid. But yeah, it was a super dysfunctional relationship. And like I said, They were the richest. That was the biggest house I've ever. The most dysfunctional family I've ever had was the richest one. They had the most resources. So, but yeah, Dr. Phil should be in jail. Dr. Phil should absolutely. Dr. Phil for prison. Like that's the campaign I want to run in 2028. Dr. Phil for prison, because he should be in jail, and he's not. And he's done more harm to kids and more harm to families than just about anybody else with his bullshit. RFK needs to be in jail. He killed all, like, I think it was Samoa, where he ran down there and told all those people that what was it, the polio vaccine was ineffective. It was one of the vaccines. He went down there and told them that it was ineffective, and a bunch of kids died behind his bullshit. And it's all contrarian based. If you say left, I say right kind of bullshit. It's not really based on any factual thing, you know. It doesn't really give way for different nuances in conversations and different nuances in understanding, you know. The house itself is an issue and spread apart, not forced to interact or be together. That's one. They weren't prepared for a teenager. They thought that they were going to have a cute little boy that they can just lavish gifts on, and take expensive vacations with, and we're all buddies and friends and go on these camping trips and stuff like that. They weren't ready for discipline, and they weren't ready to be the bad guy at sometimes, or be the disciplinarian, or the person that enforces a boundary on them. They didn't want to do that. And the only time they wanted to enforce a boundary is when they had reached that point of I want to say emotional arousal. They reached that point of emotional arousal where all they could do was yell at that point. They never wanted to address the behavior when it was happening. They let it build and build and build and build. You know, and then of course he had the older girlfriend, the girlfriend that was older than him, and he was head over heels in love with her. She is like 15 or 16. She was 18. Well, no, this wasn't when, by the time I got to him, he was an older teenager. They didn't. Yeah, yeah. By the time I got to him, he's an older teenager, but he's 16, 17 years old. His girlfriend was like 18 years old, and he was all enamored of her. And mom was like, there's some mommy issue. There's some weird mommy issues going on, but mom was pounding the table. Absolutely not. And her pounding the table so hard made this into like this weird Romeo and Juliet kind of complex, as opposed to just let them be around each other, and eventually they're going to get sick of each other because they're both kind of the same kid. You just not fight the relationship, because now he's because he knows that you guys are so against it, and he's trying to rub it in your face. Yeah, so the girlfriend was a lot. When I got him, he's like 16 years old. The girlfriend was like 18. She was older. She's the older woman, and all this other stuff. And he was like, like my uncles used to say, his nose was wide open. She had, his eyes would get all googly around her and stuff, and it drove his mom nuts. And she thought that she could say, "You're never going to see her again," and all this other stuff. And it turned into this weird family drama that should be on TV somewhere. And instead of just saying, "Yeah, I don't approve of her, but these are the boundaries," and letting them get on each other's nerves. And I told mom as much. Said, you need to just back off and let them get on each other's nerves, because they already fight like cats and dogs when they're together anyway. This is going to run its course. But as long as you are the person that he's rebelling against, he's going to run to her every single time. Yeah, 16 is a bit older to start doing that. Still doable, but 16 years of bad parenting. Yeah, it's bad. Like I said, this monster was not created overnight. This kid was not created overnight. And it's permissive parenting that turned into a bunch of buying this kid's good behavior and no boundaries whatsoever. And then by the time he had gotten old enough to be an older teenager, that's when they wanted to start laying down boundaries, and they would never lay it down until they were so pissed off that they could not articulate themselves like adults. And that's where it turned into screaming matches. And also didn't help that mom's drinking problem, and dad's other woman problem, and all kinds of other weird family dramas that go on in the houses of people who have too much money. Yeah, well, you set the boundaries, you establish that relationship when they're little and really focus on age appropriate kinds of things. I never believed in like you got to discipline that 1-year-old or anything, but by the time they're old enough to understand no, um, you can start setting your boundaries. You can even start setting your boundaries beforehand. But I think what happens is you have parents that are enamored of cute kids and they think they're going to be little cute kids forever. And at some point, that little cute child is going to turn into a teenager that cusses at you and is mad at you all the time. And so you have to learn um, what your reaction is going to be to that. You know, the first time my daughter, I remember when she was little, she's like, I hate you. And I was like, okay. I didn't get a react. She didn't get a reaction out of me. And that was the last time I heard it. It was the last time I heard it. Started 3 or 4, then build little stuff. Um, yeah. At 1, they can barely walk at 1. And there are very limited boundaries. I've seen people try to discipline 1-year-olds, and it's like most of the time you tell the 1-year-old no and redirect them. That's what it is. But you understand that their level of comprehension of yes and no and boundaries is very, very dubious at best. But keeping what your expectations are. And then as they become toddlers and stuff, then they have a better understanding of yes and no and small consequences and things along those lines. But they didn't want to enforce any of that stuff until he started acting up when he got older. And by then it's too late. And then he encounters somebody like me who had been dealing with teenagers since I was a teenager, essentially, because I started working in residential facilities and stuff when I was like 20, like 21 years old. So I was like maybe since the age of majority here is 19, I was maybe like 3 years older than the kids I was watching and stuff. So I'd been working with teenagers for a long, long, long time by the time I had even interacted with them. And I was in my late 20s. And um I didn't put up with this shit. And, and I was always respectful to him. And I was always nice and friendly to him. But when he hit a boundary, I would put the belt and say, no, that's not cool. You don't talk to them like that, or you don't talk to me like that. And he respected the boundary. And like I said, they thought that it was because I was big, intimidating, and black. They told me that as much. And I'm like, no, I just don't put up with kids disrespecting me, and I'm very respectful of them. And I've been cussed out by kids. And I'm like, are you done? Now I want to point out something. I haven't cursed at you one time. I haven't even raised my voice at you one time. So if we're going to continue on this interaction, I think I'm going to ask the same of you before we can start moving forward with what you want. And I would think that these super college educated people will grasp that, but it was like this thing. I did try to do parenting less, teaching them some parenting stuff, and they just didn't get it. It was a money thing. We throw enough money. We throw enough money. Understanding height dangers. I was having my nephew pick up toys at 1. It's kind of a game, but he still can do it. Yeah, and so you start shaping, and that's part of it. You start shaping the behavior. You don't have much expectation of them, but you can still start shaping the behavior when they're that little. And then as they grow older, they get accustomed to that behavior. It's how we got you. That's how our kids got used to taking a bath and going to bed, bedtime routine and stuff. They may not have understood it when we first started it, but as they grew up, it just became their norm. And that's just how it works. But it's consistency. And these people weren't consistent. They just wanted to throw money at problems. So, back to what we were saying. Yes, Dr. Phil should be in jail. RFK needs to be in jail. Um, I don't understand how this man can be in charge of our public health and he eats roadkill. Like, to me, that's a non-starter. Like, so what's your diet consist of? Roadkill. Okay, yeah, well, you can't run our health directives, bro. I'm sorry. Talking to my sister yesterday with her son, and she forcing her to wear seatbelts and provide that force rule. Yes, kids like every kid that I've encountered, and I don't like to paint with broad brush strokes, but the reason why my programs were successful when I was running, when I was in that world, was I had came in with the understanding that kids like boundaries, but they fight against boundaries because that's what they're supposed to do. But boundaries and having boundaries and expectations and things and being consistent, that is safety to them. Routines make them feel safe. When there's no routine, they feel disordered. And I dealt with that a lot of times with kids that were coming off of, having, PTSD and all kinds of other complex things. The routine was the thing that kept them feeling comfortable and safe, and they would fight against the routine. But you remove the routine and everything else fell by the wayside. And so you would see a bunch of behaviors come out when the routine went away. And so I knew that enforcing a routine and expectations on children and on kids, they actually wanted that because that made them feel safe. And some of them will go back to home lives where the parents were like, "Woo, we eat dinner or whatever, and you don't want to take a bath, cool. You don't have to wash for weeks." Like there was no expectations on what these kids were supposed to do, and no enforced enforced routine, and the kids were in chaos. I guess she's still struggling with seatbelts with her son. Yeah, I listen. The seatbelt thing with my kids is like we ain't going anywhere until that seatbelt's on, and that was a thing from the time they were little. When my son, if my son or daughter was in the car seat yelling and screaming and stuff, we would pull over and stop what we were doing, take them out of the car seat, check them, make sure they're all right, and they would go right back in the car seat. And they knew that, when they were, toddlers and stuff, car seats, booster seats, and everything, they knew fighting it wasn't going to get them out of it. They knew that um, if we're going to ride in the car, we need to be buckled up. Reasonable boundaries, yes, age appropriate. Yeah. This is if we are in the car is moving, seatbelt is on. Period. There is no other option. I'm not giving you the choice. That's what your expectation is. And I used to with my court place families. Well, he doesn't want to go to school. Well, I mean, you gave him that option and he told you no. Why did you make that an option as opposed to an expectation? If I wanted to play video games at the house, I had to go to school and get good grades. That was the expectation. I had to go to school and make the grade. I couldn't not go to school, skip school all day, and then play games and do all the other stuff that I wanted to do. There was no, it wasn't presented as optional behavior. It was what was expected of me. And I think that's something that some parents just don't get. Why isn't it an option? Why is the seatbelt thing ever an option? Cars move if the car's moving, your seatbelt's on. That's the expectation. You want to get to your fun place, you want to get to the park, you better put that seatbelt on. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere until the seatbelt's on. So the way I phrase it, and this comes from working with hundreds and hundreds of families and stuff like that. I think what happens is a lot of people don't have it in their toolkit. And so the analogy I always use is if you could build a house with just using a hammer if you wanted to. You're not going to build a very good house. But if that's all you have in your toolkit, that's all you're going to use. And so a lot of parents have limited toolkits and they either don't want to add tools to their toolkit or are unaware that they're working with limited tools and what other tools they have available to done what they get done what they need to get done. And so they see solutions like we were talking about with Dr. Phil. Call Dr. Phil, have Mr. Weird fake drill sergeant guy come kidnap my kid and whisk them off to a place where they scream at him. That's all. Since they don't have anything in their toolkit, that's the only thing they reach for. Yeah. Well, if the parents aren't wearing belts, the kids aren't. And yeah, role modeling is important. I learned, I've never I had one bad car accident with my mom. We both were wearing seatbelts at the time, kept me from flying through the windshield. And so I don't get in cars without seatbelts. I don't ride in cars without seatbelts. That's never been part of that hasn't been part of my life. When I was little, in the 80s, listen, in the 80s, it was anything goes. And some cars didn't even have seatbelts. You get an old enough car, it didn't even have functioning seatbelts. But once we got, late 80s, 90s and stuff, man, seatbelts were on, and a seatbelt saved my life. And so it's like, I'm not gonna. It's just like, um, the one time I said, and I was working in group homes at the time, I was like, I'm not going to get a flu shot this year. I'm healthy. I almost died of the flu, like almost died of influenza A. Like I was within a couple of hours of not being here anymore. And so that was the only thing I needed to say, okay, I'm never missing my flu shot again. Ever, ever, ever. And so when you role model the behaviors that you want your kids to, you role model you want the behaviors you want your kids to demonstrate. And some people aren't good with that. They want to act the way that they always want to act, but then they want their kids to act in a different way, and that's not what it is. You know, the kid is always watching what you do, even if they don't do exactly what you do. They're always watching what you do. So that's what it is. All right. Um, shoot, dang, I gotta go get bedtime stuff started for the kids. So thanks for tuning in. I do appreciate you. Please, hey, thank you for jumping in the conversation. I love when people jump in and actually contribute something to the show. My stepbrother is out joyriding with his cousin. His friends, they're all giving him shit for putting on seatbelts. Some of man keep on his belt, put their belts on. I don't know how he managed that. Anyway, came too fast. All were okay. Yeah, that's scary too. That's very scary. I'm glad they're okay, because that's a scary situation. And he was the it was very fortunate to have him in the car to kind of convince them to get their seatbelts on. Right? It saved them, and hopefully you have a bunch of kids now that know as adults them seatbelts need to come on. All it took was that was the if you ever seen the video of the tomato in the steel box thing, somebody showed me that one time, like, oh, that's not what I want in my life. And the seatbelt's on. Like I said, surviving an accident with a seat by a seatbelt is also was very instructive too. Just takes one time. All it takes is one time. Your skin is not tougher than a car. Your skin is not harder than a car. You know, And I've gotten, people made fun of me. Like I used to do videos in my car and stuff. Like, ha, you got the seatbelt on. I'm like, yeah, that's just me. Take that seatbelt off. Nah, nah, I ain't that tough. I don't have to fly through the windshield to prove anything to anybody. So, um, but hey, appreciate you. Is it Maddie Holmes? Thank you for tuning in. And if you tune, I will do a segment about RFK because I had an entire segment on another thing about RFK and neurodivergence and me dealing with ADHD and the other A that I don't necessarily want to get diagnosed with as long as he's running a registry. But I probably will end up getting that diagnosis here at some point in time, just so that I can set an example for my daughter. But um, I will if you tune in next week, I will do the RFK show. Yeah, man. It's scary, like because his view of it, his view of it is work camps. You just need to. You just you're not your brain doesn't work different. You don't experience the world differently. You just need a work camp to reorient yourself. You know, and thinking differently is just wrong in his mind. I used to tell people like autism, ADHD is just a different way of perceiving the world and experiencing the world. And I don't know why we need to cure that. And I don't know why that's dangerous for some people. But, you know, yeah, really helps with being put into a labor concentration camp. That is the key. That will make me feel less anxious. That will cure up my depression and my ADHD. Is fear of being put into a forced labor camp run by RFK, who eats roadkill, stores roadkill in his fridge and eats it, and swims in raw sewage, and does enough steroids to kill a small horse because he's not natty. That's not him eating liver or whatever. That is steroids. I'm a gym rat. I may not always look it, but I lift that heavy stuff, and that man is on all kinds of gas. Like he's on all kinds of gear. The man is damn near 80 years old and looks like a Lou Ferrigno. That is not natural. Eating fava beans with that liver, and those fava beans are injected with horse steroids. They're injected with with all kinds of roids. So, Maddie, thanks for tuning in. I will be putting together the RFK episode, so stay tuned for that. Yeah, and horse dewormer too. You can't forget the horse dewormer. So I appreciate you. I'm gonna get up here and start getting the kids ready for bed. I will talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. Blerding While Dad. Peace.